What happens when the CEO who built a company from scratch finds out his own safety rules are being ignored by the very people meant to enforce them? Zane Hartley leaned against the window of his office, arms crossed, watching the delivery vans line up at the central lot across the street. 10 locations now. 10. Not bad for a guy who once hand-loaded furniture into a borrowed pickup truck. He sipped his black coffee, but it didn't taste right. Something had been off for months. Complaints had tripled: late deliveries, damaged packages, staff quitting without notice. He'd asked for reports, got spreadsheets. He'd asked District Manager Jim for answers, got vague apologies, and were working on it. But Zane knew better. Paper never showed the full picture. He turned from the window and looked at the manila file on his desk. It held a fake resume, fake ID, and a uniform polo shirt with the company logo. The name tag read Illy. Zane hadn't personally visited Store 8 in over a year. Most of the delivery staff had turned over, and the current supervisor, Wes, had been promoted by Jim, someone Zane was starting to doubt. It was the perfect place to go in unnoticed. The next morning, Zane stood outside Store 8's warehouse in an old pair of jeans, and the company-issued cap pulled low over his face. Beard grown out, contacts in, voice a bit raspier than usual. No one would recognize the founder of the company. Not here. Not with a fake backstory claiming he just moved from Idaho. A short guy with thick arms and a clipboard came out of the side door. "You the new temp, Illy?" he asked, flipping through a sheet. "Yeah," Zane replied. "I'm Wes. You ride with me today." "Hope you don't get carsick." Zane followed him around back where a white cargo van waited, engine running. Another worker in a hoodie loaded the last few boxes. "We're short-handed since Joel quit," Wes muttered, sliding into the driver's seat. Not that he was much use. "People nowadays are soft." Zane kept quiet. He'd been told Joel was dependable. The story didn't add up, but he let it go. As they pulled out, Wes immediately lit a cigarette and cracked the window. "You ever driven delivery before?" Zane nodded. "A little. Why Joel quit?" Wes snorted. "Some BS about unsafe conditions. Said he got hurt lifting a heavy box. I told him to man up or get out." Zane's stomach tightened. That wasn't how they trained supervisors. Every worker was supposed to have dollies, proper gloves, and team lifts for heavy freight. Zane decided to watch more before speaking. They made their first stop at a small apartment complex. Wes parked in a fire lane and left the hazard lights off. "Isn't this illegal?" Zane asked. "Only if you get caught," Wes grinned, jumping out. "Help me with this couch." There were no straps. No dolly. The box was marked team lift over 70 pounds. Wes didn't even glance at it. Zane grabbed one end. It was way too heavy for two people without gear. His lower back screamed in protest. "Come on, pick it up," Wes barked, already halfway to the stairs. Zane forced himself to move, sweat beading on his forehead. By the time they finished, his hands were shaking. Back in the van, Wes chuckled. "You're not bad for a newbie, better than Joel." He whined like a child. Zane didn't laugh. He stared out the window, watching the city blur by. This wasn't just one guy being careless, this was leadership failure. He felt it in his bones. The next few deliveries were the same. No brakes, no safety checks. Wes never used the lift gate once. He parked wherever he wanted, sometimes blocking driveways. Twice, Zane saw him toss fragile boxes onto concrete porches. At the sixth stop, a small woman in her 60s opened the door. "Ma'am, your dining set," Wes said, already hauling it out. Wait, she said, panicked. "I have a dolly in the garage. I can help." "No need," Wes said, dumping the box on her front step with a thud. Zane winced. "That's marked fragile." "She signed for it," Wes said, hopping back in the van. "Not my problem anymore." Zane sat in silence, heart pounding. This was his company. His name was on every receipt, and this man was destroying everything he'd built. Back at the warehouse by evening, Wes slapped him on the back. "Good first day, Illy. You'll toughen up." Zane nodded, jaw clenched. Inside, a young woman was sweeping the floor near the time clock. She looked up and smiled. "Hey, I'm Zariah. You're the new guy." "Yeah, Illy, you okay? You're limping." "Just tired," Zane said. She frowned. "Wes made you lift alone, didn't he?" He didn't answer. She lowered her voice. "He's been like that ever since Joel left. A few of us complained to Jim, but nothing changed. Be careful. He doesn't like being questioned." Zane felt a wave of guilt. These people had trusted leadership to step in, and leadership had failed them. He looked around. The warehouse was cluttered. Safety signs were torn. One fire exit was blocked by pallets. "Thanks for the heads up," he said. She nodded. "Let me know if you need help. I've been here 2 years. I know where all the bodies are buried." Zane smiled for the first time all day. He clocked out, hands sore, back aching, and mind spinning. He couldn't let this continue, but he needed more. One day wasn't enough. If Wes was cutting corners this blatantly, what else was happening under his nose? Tomorrow, he'd ride with someone else. Maybe get a clearer picture, but one thing was already certain: things at Store 8 were broken. And they needed to be fixed from the inside out. Zane arrived 15 minutes early the next morning, the lot still dim under the gray morning sky. A cold wind cut through the thin fabric of his uniform shirt. His lower back reminded him of yesterday's abuse with every step. He stretched discreetly near the loading bay, watching as 2 vans idled with open doors. A teenager in a faded hoodie tossed boxes into one of them without scanning a single label. No clipboard, no checklist. A woman with a worn baseball cap and sharp eyes approached, checking her phone between glances at the van. She moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who didn't waste energy. Wes wasn't in sight. "You Willie?" she asked, voice low and quick. "Yeah, you?" "Rocks. Dispatch messed up again. They got me solo with 22 stops. You riding with me or wasting space?" "I'll pull my weight," Zane said. "Hope so. Grab the last 3 boxes from lane 4. They're going to the west side." Big hill, tight driveways. Zane hauled the boxes into the van, careful to scan each one using the handheld device clipped to the dashboard. Rock started the van without a word and pulled out of the lot. No music, no small talk. The first few stops went smoothly. Rox didn't cut corners, and she worked fast, too fast. Zane noticed the way she favored her right leg after lifting anything heavier than a microwave. She never asked for help, even when it was clearly needed. At the 3rd stop, she dragged a desk up a sloped driveway alone, ignoring his offer to grab the dolly. "You don't get ahead by waiting on people," she said, breathing hard as she returned. Zane didn't argue. Instead, he watched how she handled customers. Professional, polite, but distant. At a small craftsman house on the edge of the delivery zone, she handed an elderly man his flat-packed bookshelf and waited while he signed. "You folks used to bring things inside," the man said, adjusting his glasses. "We don't do that anymore," Rox replied. "Policy change." "Liability," he nodded, disappointed. "Guess it's all different these days." Back in the van, Zane asked, "When did that change?" 2 months ago. Jim said insurance flagged too many claims. Said we're not furniture movers. But customers don't know that, right? They find out when we leave things on their porch. Rox adjusted her mirrors. "I used to explain, doesn't matter, the calls still come in." They drove in silence for a while. Rox's scanning device beeped as she double-checked the next 3 stops. "What happened to the guy who used to ride with you?" Zane asked. "Derek, he got tendinitis, shouldn't have been lifting alone. Wes told him to pick up the pace or find a new job, so he found one." Zane looked at her. "And they didn't replace him." Rox let out a dry laugh. "Replace? They said we're overstaffed, told me to optimize the route, which means 2 people's work, 1 paycheck." They pulled up to a narrow townhouse with a steep front walk. Rox opened the back doors and handed Zane a long, awkwardly shaped box. "Go slow. Customer marked it delicate, you drop it. I'm writing it up." Zane carried the box carefully up the steps and left it just inside the door after the customer signed. When he returned, Rox was sitting on the loading lip of the van, one knee pulled to her chest, the other leg stretched out. "You hurt?" he asked. She stood up quickly. "No, just catching my breath." He didn't press her, but something was off. Her hands trembled slightly when she climbed back into the driver's seat. After 5 more deliveries, the route took them into the industrial district. As they turned onto a side street, a large truck blocked half the road. Rox slowed, trying to squeeze through, but the van scraped the edge of a dumpster with a loud screech. "Damn it," she muttered, pulling over. She climbed out and inspected the passenger side. Long gash, not deep but visible. Zane joined her. "You okay?" "Yeah, van's not." "This is the 3rd time this month." Routes keep getting tighter and GPS hasn't been updated in weeks. Jim said they're working on it. She opened the glove box and jotted the damage on a log sheet. No photos, no digital report. Zane noted the absence. Shouldn't there be an incident form? There used to be, Rox said. Now we just log it and keep driving. Back inside the cab, she adjusted her seat and winced. Zane asked, "You ever think about taking a break?" She laughed without turning. "You get 6 minutes for lunch and 1 bathroom stop. Anything more, it's inefficient. I've seen guys get written up for stretching too long." They finished the last 2 stops just before 3. Rox parked the van behind the warehouse and cut the engine. The place buzzed with activity. 2 workers unloaded a full truck with no lift gate, just a metal ramp and brute force. Inside, the receiving area was backed up. Boxes piled against the wall, blocking half the aisle. Zaraya stood at the far end, sorting return labels with a scanner, her forehead damp with sweat. Rox punched out at the wall clock. "Thanks for the help," she said to Zane, grabbing her bag. He nodded. "You going to get that leg looked at?" "No time, and no coverage unless it's a break or blood." She left without waiting for a reply. Zane stood there a moment, the warehouse noises bouncing off the concrete walls. He walked to the back office. The door was open. Inside, a small desk was buried in paperwork. A man in his early 30s sat behind it, tapping on a tablet. He looked up. "You need something?" the man asked. "Just checking in, first week." "Right, Illy, I'm Connor, admin for Store 8. You need to schedule anything, I'm your guy, busy back here." Connor sighed. "Don't even ask. We're behind 3 days on intake, no temp support. Jim says we don't qualify for overflow staffing. You need a certain volume before they send help. We're just under the line." Zane tilted his head. "So you're stuck, pretty much. If we fall further behind, we get dinged on the metrics. If we rush it, we mislabel things and get returns. Either way, we lose." Zane glanced around. No cameras. No supervisors, no safety manager, just overworked staff and a broken system. Outside, he caught Zaraya by the loading dock. "Long day?" he asked. She nodded, wiping her hands on her pants. "We're 2 team members short, and all morning deliveries came back unsorted. Wes said we have to finish before tomorrow, or we're cleaning on Sunday." "Is that normal?" "No, it's gotten worse. He cuts shifts, then blames us for being behind." Zane looked her in the eye. "Why do you stay?" She hesitated. "I got a kid, bills, and there's still good people here." Rox, Connor. "We try to cover for each other." Zane nodded slowly. "You ever think about quitting?" "Every week, but I don't want to leave things worse for the next person." He didn't say anything else. He just stood there, watching her walk back inside. That night, he sat alone in his hotel room and opened his laptop. He pulled up the company's internal platform and searched for Jim's regional evaluations. The last audit was 6 months old. It was glowing, too glowing. No mention of turnover, missed deliveries, damaged property, or underreported injuries. He dug deeper, checking the safety training logs. The names of half the warehouse team weren't listed. Rox's last certification was over a year ago. Joel's name had been wiped from the system entirely. Zane closed the laptop. The problem wasn't just Wes. It was the structure above him. Tomorrow, he'd shadow Connor in admin. He needed to see how deep the rot went, and then he'd decide what needed to be cut out. The warehouse lights buzzed overhead as Zane stepped into the cramped admin room just after opening. A tangle of Ethernet cords hung from the ceiling corner, and a box fan rattled in the window. Connor sat hunched over a keyboard, tapping rhythmically, a half-eaten granola bar balanced on a stack of invoices beside him. "You're early," Connor said without looking up. "I figured I'd learn more if I started while things were still quiet," Zane replied, pulling up a plastic chair. Connor leaned back, cracked his knuckles, and slid a binder toward him. "Here, weekly intake logs. You'll see the fun I get to deal with." Zane flipped through the pages. Handwritten notes were scrawled in the margins, some crossed out and rewritten in a different pen. "Half of these aren't signed," Connor nodded. "Wes says we don't need signatures if we're running behind, but when something goes missing, guess who gets blamed?" Zane kept flipping. "You ever raise that with Jim? I've emailed him twice. He told me to focus on efficiency and stop clogging the pipeline with paper trails. I started taking photos of the loading decks just to cover myself." "Do you keep those?" On a flash drive. I don't upload them. Wes would delete them before they saw daylight. Zane nodded slowly. He looked past Connor, through the cracked blinds, and saw a box truck backing into the dock. It jolted abruptly, tires grinding against the edge of the platform. Connor followed his gaze. That's Rick. He's covering for a guy from Store 6, been driving for 5 years. Said this is the worst managed location he's ever seen. I believe it. Connor stood up, stretched, and walked to the filing cabinet. You want to see something worse? He pulled out a slim folder labeled Training Logs. Inside were only a few sheets, some dated from nearly a year ago, others blank. Wes says digital training is enough, Connor said. But the LMS system shows 0 completion rates for the new hires. We're supposed to do in-person refreshers every 90 days. Last one was 8 months ago. Zane closed the folder. How are people supposed to know what to do in an emergency? They don't, Connor said. If there's a fire or a chemical spill, it's just panic and improvisation. A knock rattled the doorframe. Zariah stepped in, her arms full of misprinted labels, printers jamming again. It spit out 40 sheets before I could stop it. Connor took them from her. That's the second time this week. It's overheating. I told Wes we need it replaced. Zariah glanced at Zane. You still surviving? Barely, Zane said. She half smiled, brushing a strand of hair out of her face. You're not the first to say that. As she walked out, Connor lowered his voice. She's been asking to move to dispatch for weeks. Wes keeps saying we don't have the budget, but we're spending more on returns and reprints than it would cost to train her. Zane stood up. Show me the return logs. Connor opened a new tab on his computer. The spreadsheet loaded slowly. Dozens of rows filled the screen. Wrong items, late deliveries, damaged packaging, incomplete installations. Zane scanned the reasons column. One note stood out. Customer refused delivery due to smell. That's not a typo, Connor said. Some of the boxes are stored next to the back wall where the leak is. Mold gets into the cardboard. Nobody fixed the leak. Wes called in a guy who patched it with duct tape, said it was good enough for now. That was 2 months ago. Zane felt a pulse of heat rise in his neck. You have photos of that too, Connor nodded. They're on the same drive. Zane turned back toward the window, jaw tight. He watched Zariah helping a new guy lift a box onto a dolly. The kid looked nervous. She steadied him, pointing at how to angle the wheels on the ramp. Connor followed his stare. She trains half the new hires. Wes doesn't even introduce himself until their second week. Zane's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out and glanced at the screen, a message from his assistant back at HQ. Final quarterly numbers were in. On paper, Store 8 had hit their targets. No red flags. He slipped the phone back in. Let's take a walk, Zane said. They stepped out into the warehouse. The air smelled faintly of cardboard dust and old oil. A pallet jack squeaked across the far end of the floor. One of the loading bays was blocked by an abandoned crate. A dented recycling bin overflowed with plastic wrap. Zane approached the break corner, where a whiteboard hung above a scratched-up table. The board listed shift assignments and delivery metrics. Under today's date, someone had scrawled "no excuses" in red marker. Connor pointed at the list. That's Wes's writing. He updates it himself. Sometimes he adds names to routes without asking. Last week, someone showed up and found out they were doing a double shift with no notice. Who approves the hours? Wes inputs them. I just transmit the final numbers unless someone flags an error. Zane walked toward the blocked fire exit. The crate leaned at an angle, partially obscuring the sign. This always like this? Connor nodded. We had a safety audit scheduled 3 months ago. Jim postponed it, said the region didn't have capacity. Zane crouched, ran his fingers along the floor under the crate. Dust caked thick around the base. It hadn't been moved in weeks. As they circled back toward the admin room, Wes stood at the loading dock, arms crossed, eyes following them. Hey, Illy, Wes called. You lost or just making friends? Just learning how things run, Zane said without stopping. Don't let Connor fill your head with nonsense. He likes to make problems sound bigger than they are. Connor didn't respond. He disappeared back into the office. Zane walked past Wes, meeting his eyes briefly. The man's posture was relaxed, but his jaw was tight. I heard we're short again tomorrow, Zane said. Yeah, one of the temps bailed. I'll fill in if I have to. Zane nodded and kept walking. He spent the next hour reviewing inventory intake in silence, his thoughts heavy. At 5, the last route returned. Rox stepped out of the van, her shirt soaked with sweat, a small grease stain on her pant leg. She limped slightly, but didn't stop moving until every box was scanned. Zane met her at the time clock. "You still good to work Saturday?" he asked. "Don't have much choice," she said, wiping her forehead with her sleeve. "I need the hours." "You ever think about reporting the injury?" She looked at him, expression unreadable. "To who?" She clocked out and walked away. The next morning, Zane arrived half an hour before opening. He used the master key he'd brought with him, one of the few things he'd held onto when he stepped into this role. The office was empty. The building silent. He plugged Connor's flash drive into the admin computer. Photo folders opened cracked pallets, water-stained boxes, mold-damaged van interiors. One image showed a fire extinguisher with a tag 3 months out of date. Zane copied them to his laptop. He opened the employee files. Joel's name was gone, but the departure note had been replaced with a line that read, "Voluntary resignation, no follow-up needed." He clicked on the record for Zariah. Her last raise was 14 months ago. Her performance reviews were glowing. Every note marked exceeds expectations. No promotion requests were attached. Connor stepped in behind him, surprised. "You're here early," he said. "I needed to confirm something," Zane said. "I think I've seen enough." Connor's eyes narrowed. "You're not just a temp, are you?" Zane stood up and faced him. "No, and after today, no one here will be in the dark anymore." Connor took a step back, stunned. Zane didn't wait for him to respond. He walked through the warehouse as the first shift arrived. Zariah froze when she saw him head toward the loading dock where Wes was barking instructions. Zane climbed onto the platform and raised his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "My name isn't Ali." The warehouse fell quiet. "My name is Zane Hartley. I founded this company 20 years ago. I've spent the last week working beside you, and what I've seen here is unacceptable." Wes's face drained of color. Zane turned toward him. "You've endangered employees, ignored safety protocols, falsified logs, and misled regional leadership." Wes opened his mouth, but Zane cut him off. "This location is now under review. Effective immediately, you're suspended. Regional will conduct a full audit starting tomorrow." He turned back to the team. "Connor will act as interim site lead. Safety inspections begin this afternoon. Everyone will receive updated training and back pay for missed hours during understaffing." Zariah looked stunned. Rox leaned against a support beam, eyes locked on him. Zane continued, voice steady. "This isn't how I intended to reconnect with the ground level of this company, but I'm glad I did. You've been carrying a broken system. That ends today." Silence held for a beat, then someone clapped. It spread slowly, not loud, but steady. Zane didn't return to the admin office. He stayed by the dock, helping unload the first truck of the day, one box at a time. Tomorrow would be about fixing what was broken. But today was about standing beside the people who'd kept it moving, even when no one was watching. By the following Monday, the tone inside Store 8 was unmistakably different, but not quieter. The warehouse buzzed with a nervous energy, like a space in flux, caught between old habits and something forming in their place. The regional audit team had arrived at sunrise, 2 people in plain dress with clipboards and tablets. They walked the perimeter, checked the storage bays, and made notes without comment. No one had been told exactly what would happen next. Zane had stayed local, foregoing his return to headquarters to oversee the internal reset himself. He hadn't worn the uniform since the reveal, but he didn't return to his corner office either. Instead, he worked from a folding table near the intake area, where he could hear the dispatch calls and see how workers moved through the day. He'd removed Wes from the premises the same afternoon he suspended him, and now the team operated under Connor's interim direction with a lot more structure and a lot less shouting, but the problems hadn't vanished. If anything, they were clearer now. Around mid-morning, Zane stepped into the repurposed break room, still cramped, still half-lit, but now housing a rolling whiteboard covered in fresh task assignments and training schedules. Connor stood in front of it, listing off the day's safety refreshers. "Zariah, you're leading the handling protocol at noon. Rox, you're with me at dispatch. We've got 2 new hires showing up in 15. I want them shadowing before they touch a box. Zane waited until the group dispersed before walking over. Connor scratched something onto a clipboard, not glancing up. How are you holding up? Zane asked. Connor leaned back, exhaled. It's like trying to fix a roof while standing on it. Every time I plug one leak, I find 2 more. Zane nodded. That's usually how it is. What's the biggest gap right now? We're still short on licensed drivers. The pool we're pulling from has a backlog on background checks, and the intake team keeps breaking down mid-shift. Half of them were trained by watching someone else for an hour. I'm bringing in temporary trainers from HQ people who actually built the systems. They'll be here by Thursday. Don't wait for them to start fixing intake, though. Let Zarya take lead on floor layout. Connor hesitated. She's not officially a lead. She is now, Zane said. Get the paperwork started. Connor nodded once, then turned back toward the board. Zane stepped outside and walked the perimeter of the building. The old water-stained wall had been cleared of boxes, and the leak had been patched properly over the weekend by a third-party crew. A maintenance invoice was still taped to the door, awaiting his sign-off. He walked past it without removing it. Near the loading dock, Rox sat on an overturned crate, a half-empty water bottle in her hand. Her leg was propped up on a flat of unused labels. She didn't stand when she saw him. I'm not slacking, she said. I didn't think you were. She squinted at the late morning sun. The new kid they paired me with this morning called in. He was supposed to be on the southern route. Now we're splitting it with the other van. Connor told me, Zane said. You need to scale back. You're not hiding that limp as well as you think. I'll rest when I can't drive. That's not the deal anymore, Zane said. You're not going to burn yourself out to keep a broken system running. That's what I used to reward. I'm not proud of that. She looked at him for a long moment. You think a title or a few checklists is going to fix all this? No, but stopping the damage comes first. Then we rebuild. He paused. You ever considered moving into training full-time? She laughed once, short and sharp. Teaching people how to lift boxes. Teaching them how to do it without ending up like you working through an injury for a job that couldn't be bothered calling back. She didn't answer right away. Then she nodded once slowly. If you're serious, I'll take a swing at it. I am, he said. You'll start by designing the new driver onboarding. Pick someone to shadow you this week, someone who's not trying to impress, just trying to get it right. She gave a small nod, then stood carefully and walked back inside. Near the intake zone, Zarya was repositioning shelving with 2 other workers, rerouting foot traffic to clear emergency exits. She didn't notice Zane approach until he was a few feet away. I heard about the new role, she said, not stopping what she was doing. You've been doing it already. Now it's official. You'll get the bump in title and pay this week. I want you to redesign material flow, whatever you think will speed up intake without stacking risk. I already started mapping it. The aisles are too narrow, and we lose time dodging each other. If we rotate the staging zones, we can cut unloading time by 30%. Do it, and document it. I want to replicate whatever works, not just patch holes. She raised an eyebrow. You planning to visit every store like this? No. But I'm putting a system in place that does what I didn't listen before things break. She nodded. Then I'll make sure this one's worth copying. By late afternoon, the audit team handed Zane their preliminary findings. He read them standing beside the loading bay. Multiple violations of internal policy, lapses in compliance tracking, missing safety equipment, and a culture of silence when it came to injury reporting. None of it surprised him. What did surprise him was how much of the damage had been preventable not by more software or slogans, but by leadership simply showing up and staying alert. He signed the corrective action plan and handed it back. The next morning, Zane called a full staff meeting in the warehouse. No chairs. The workers formed a loose circle near the dispatch tables. The hum of the refrigeration units in the back was the only sound until he spoke. This isn't a speech, he said. It's a reset. He moved to stand beside the board where Wes's red marker still faintly ghosted the words, no excuses. Someone had tried to scrub it off, but the stain remained. I built this company with my hands and a rented truck. But somewhere along the way, I stopped looking at the people who keep it running. That's on me. And if I didn't come down here myself, I never would have seen how bad it really got. No one interrupted. Even the newer workers, who barely knew who he was, stood still. This warehouse was running on fear. Fear of being cut, fear of being blamed. That ends now. From this point forward, no one here is punished for telling the truth, and no one is rewarded for hiding problems to hit numbers. He turned to Zariah. Your layout changes go live tomorrow. To Rox, your training program begins next week. You'll work with HQ to build it out. And to Connor, you'll transition into full site manager. Your job is to protect this team, not cover for broken systems. He looked back at the circle. This place doesn't get fixed overnight. I won't insult you by pretending otherwise, but it's going to get better. Not because of a policy change, but because the people who were ignored are finally being heard. There was no applause. Just quiet nods, a few exchanged looks between workers who'd been here long enough to know what real change looked like and what it didn't. Zane stepped down and walked toward the intake area. There were still boxes to process, still routes to assign, still equipment to replace and injuries to track and new hires to train. But for the first time in far too long, the company was no longer pretending things were fine. They were finally doing the work.